A man accidentally discovers a 100-pound lead capsule in an abandoned hospital, and he immediately starts having crooked thoughts. He tells his companion to take out the toolkit right away, and in no time, they pry open the tightly sealed bottom of the lead capsule, pulling out a core containing radioactive elements from within. Right after that, the two of them deliver the core to a scrapyard. Evanildo, the scrapyard owner, doesn't recognize the object either, but he doesn't refuse it and accepts it for recycling right away. At this moment, they have no idea how serious the situation is, and the young man is over the moon the instant he gets the money. What's terrifying is that the ignorant Evanildo thinks he's scored a great deal, unaware that he's about to pay a devastating price for it. Even more frightening is that two employees at the scrapyard take apart the lethal object that very night. Just as Evanildo is turning off the lights to head home for the evening, he notices something unusual and rushes over to check it out. He discovers a beautiful blue glow emitting from inside, and he immediately picks it up to examine it closely, thinking he's picked up a rare treasure today. To prevent this treasure from being stolen, he actually puts it in a bag and takes it straight home. Beyond all expectations, 10 days pass in the blink of an eye, and his wife Antonia's body begins to experience very uncomfortable reactions. But he can't even be bothered to look after his wife, as he's more concerned with asking her for the blue glowing canister.
Mulher, vem cá, você viu a minha marmita?
Marmita?
Marmita, aquele treviloso. Você não viu, não? Eu deixei na sala, tava na sala.
Ah, bem, então, vi nada não.
Como não viu?
He searches for ages but can't find it, and Antonia tells him that the glowing container is a bit eerie because she feels a wave of dizziness every time she finishes washing it. However, Evanildo doesn't take it seriously and turns around to leave the house. The moment he steps out, Antonia immediately takes a woven sack out of the cabinet, hands it to Raimundo to carry, and then they actually hop onto a bus with no hesitation. They have no idea that this unconscious move will bring a massive disaster to the local villagers. Yet this is only the tip of the iceberg, as they soon arrive at the health department building carrying the bag. As it turns out, the staff member says to Antonia,
Olha, desculpa, mas a gente já tá fechando.
Ah, tá fechando, mas não fechou, moço. E eu tenho o direito de falar, né?
Claro, desculpa, é Dona...
Antônia.
Antônia.
Os meninos que trabalham pro meu marido já foram tudo parar no hospital. Carlos mais Lúcio também. Agora eu tô doente, meu marido. É tontura, é enjoo.
Eu entendi, Dona Antônia, mas o que é isso?
Isso aí é uma peça que meu marido comprou lá no Ferro Velho.
Uma peça de ferro?
É.
Deve ser, então, a fossa da casa da senhora?
Não tem como ser, não.
Tá com algum problema?
Não tem como.
Então,
não.
talvez uma intoxicação alimentar, alguma coisa
Moço,
estragada?
não faz sentido isso daí, não. É casa diferente, comida diferente.
No matter how Antonia tries to explain, the man doesn't believe a word she says, and instead, he hurriedly kicks them out. He even has the receptionist bring a stool to place the radioactive element on, before finally driving them away to a nearby small clinic. However, this is far from over. The next day, when the man comes to work, he finds the woven bag sitting there, untouched. Meanwhile, Antonia is already lying in the small clinic receiving treatment. Fortunately, she encounters a responsible doctor at the clinic, and as he inquires about Antonia's condition, he notices her wrist has already started to rot, and even more terrifyingly, the infection has spread to her neck. The doctor immediately realizes the severity of the situation because the clinic's beds are already crowded with patients showing the same symptoms. After thinking for a moment, he immediately calls his friend Marcio, who specializes in nuclear physics.
Tô com uma série de pacientes aqui com os mesmos sintomas. Tontura, dor de cabeça, queda de cabelo, vômito. Aí eu lembrei que você fez especialização em física nuclear, não foi?
Uhum.
Envenenamento radioativo.
Não. Não pode ser não, porque para as pessoas terem esses sintomas teria que ser uma síndrome aguda.
Que ela levou lá para vigilância sanitária. Você não quer aproveitar que você tá na cidade e dar um pulo lá para dar uma olhada nisso para mim?
Marcio instantly feels that something is very wrong. To confirm whether it is indeed nuclear radiation, he grabs a scintillation counter and rushes to the scene. At the same time, the receptionist at the health department also feels something is off and calls the fire department for help immediately. But as Marcio's team nears the clinic, they get stuck in a massive traffic jam, and the device immediately starts beeping an alarm. Marcio sprints toward the clinic as fast as he can.
Cris, eu não falei pra ninguém mexer nisso.
Eu não mexi, só chamei os bombeiros.
Eu vou jogar no rio.
Não, isso é radioativo.
radioativo. Esse negócio é muito perigoso. Tem que voltar pra onde tava agora.
Não, Márcio, eu não posso voltar pra dentro da vigilância.
Vai contaminar outras
Tem
pessoas. Vai jogar no rio pra
Mas,
contaminar a
Márcio...
casa das pessoas. Jânio, você já ouviu falar em Chernobyl?
Chernobyl?
Jânio, me escuta. A gente precisa evacuar esse prédio. Esse negócio estourou a capacidade do cintilômetro. Eu, você, todo mundo aqui já foi exposto. Jânio, me escuta. A gente precisa evacuar esse prédio. As pessoas podem morrer por isso.
It is only then that the man completely loses his cool, rushing inside to trigger the alarm and evacuate everyone from the health department immediately. The firefighters also leave the bag untouched on the stool, but everything is already too late. Marcio immediately grills the man about the source of the radioactive element, and luckily, he had made a detailed registration for Antonia at the time. The two of them don't waste a single second and drive straight to the scrapyard. But as soon as they reach the entrance, the meter hits the maximum level. Without even having time to put on any protection, they rush to find Evanildo for questioning.
Evanildo, a gente é da vigilância sanitária. A sua esposa, Dona Antônia, ela foi até a gente com um objeto. O senhor sabe disso?
Aquele objeto, ele é muito perigoso. Ele tem um elemento radioativo que contaminou aí dentro, Evanildo. A sua esposa tá no hospital, não tá? E parece que tem mais gente lá que tá contaminada. Tem contaminação nesse ferro velho, meu amigo, e ela é muito, muito, muito alta.
To their surprise, Evanildo won't listen to a word they say, and even prepares to call over two of his buddies to beat them up. No matter how Marcio tries to reason with him, Evanildo simply refuses to listen. In the end, Marcio only manages to find out where the radioactive element came from. The two of them head straight to the abandoned hospital, only to find that the radiotherapy machine inside has long since been reduced to nothing but a hollow steel frame. What infuriates Marcio is how medical professionals could just abandon such a lethal object and leave it unattended. Seeing the situation spiral out of control, they immediately seek out the city's health minister, Souza. But unexpectedly, he is only concerned about his own political career and shows absolutely no sense of responsibility or accountability.
A gente precisa evacuar toda aquela área para fazer a medição e a descontaminação.
Eu nem tenho o poder de fazer isso.
Bom, então fala com o governador.
E se não tiver nada? Você assina um papel assumindo a responsabilidade?
Não existe a menor possibilidade de não ter nada. Secretário, me escuta. Eu fiz as medições e fora do ferro velho ela já está altíssima.
To convince Souza of the gravity of the situation, Marcio immediately dials the number of Dr. Orenstein from the National Nuclear Department.
Realmente tinha uma máquina de cobalto lá, mas ela foi retirada.
Certeza, doutor? Porque eu vi...
Realmente tinha uma outra máquina lá. Só se ela ficou, porque aqui não foi comunicado nada. Não dá pra saber se ela foi retirada ou não. Não, era de Césio, 137.
Um dos isótopos de Chernobyl.
Isso.
Sólido ou em pó?
Era uma daquelas obsoletas, sabe? Em pó.
Upon hearing the response, Marcio is completely stunned. Dr. Orenstein is even more shocked and tells Marcio to evacuate the crowd first, promising to head to the cesium-137 leak site immediately. To avoid any responsibility or risk, Souza takes Marcio directly to the governor's office. Marcio immediately explains the severity of the incident to Governor Roberto. After hearing the news, Roberto immediately clears out the city's largest stadium to quarantine the radiated citizens. Meanwhile, at Evanildo's house, he is still having a gathering with relatives when a knock suddenly comes from the door. But when he opens the door, he is totally dumbfounded as a swarm of police officers appears outside. Yet Evanildo is still prepared to go head-to-head with the officers at this point. But just then, there is a sudden twist in the situation. Realizing things aren't right, Evanildo finally leads his family onto the quarantine vehicle. By now, severe hair loss has started to appear on the back of his head. Soon, they are successfully transported to the quarantine zone. However, the quarantine work has only just begun, because hundreds of radiated individuals are completely untraceable. In an instant, Dr. Orenstein from the Nuclear Commission arrives on the scene, and Marcio provides the professor with a detailed report on the specifics of the cesium leak once again.
Márcio, qual foi o critério que você usou para isolar as casas?
Obviamente eu não tinha um protocolo. Então usei o máximo de radiação autorizada, 0,1 milirem dentro das casas, 0,5 do lado de fora. Eu só tinha um cintilômetro. Então eu não consegui medir com precisão o grau de radiação de nada.
Not only does Dr. Orenstein customize a perfect plan on the spot, but he also brings a more advanced precision instrument. They rush to the health bureau overnight, but beyond all expectations, the test results leave Dr. Orenstein in utter shock. He immediately explains the situation to Roberto. Soon,
Geiger acusou a dose máxima. É muito grave.
Vamos tirar esse negócio daqui. Não pode ter uma bomba radioativa no meio de Goiânia. Tem que ter jeito de tirar.
Eu vou precisar de tubo de concreto. Bem grande, daqueles de esgoto. Com uma boca grande para caber por cima da cadeira. E também caminhão betoneiro.
A crane lowers a concrete pipe over the cesium-137 and pours in a massive amount of cement. But this is only a temporary emergency measure because the blue fluorescent powder has already started to spread continuously, leaving a huge amount of dust at the scrapyard. Little do they know that the following twist will completely exceed anyone's expectations. While Marcio is conducting investigations among the radiation quarantine patients, he shockingly discovers that Raimundo had carried the radioactive element onto a bus. But before he even has a chance to clarify the situation, Evanildo takes Raimundo away directly. Marcio instantly realizes the gravity of the situation and immediately finds Dr. Orenstein to report the emergency in time. Unexpectedly,
É que a Antônia e o Raimundo pegaram um ônibus da rua 26A para vigilância, levando a fonte vazando pó em uma sacola.
A gente tem que cortar a circulação imediatamente, parar o transporte público.
Parar o transporte público por causa de ônibus. Vamos com calma.
Roberto flatly refuses the nuclear department's plan because he is afraid it might impact his political career. Souza even adds fuel to the fire by scolding Dr. Orenstein. Dr. Orenstein can only shake his head in frustration. Immediately following that, Roberto and Souza storm out and slam the door, leaving the elderly Dr. Orenstein stranded in the office. Seeing that waiting any longer will only result in more civilian victims, right at that moment, Marcio proposes an emergency contingency plan. He doesn't dare to delay for a single second and turns around to head to the town hospital. Taking advantage of the gap while conducting tests for Antonia, he asks her about the detailed route of the bus ride. Fortunately, Antonia quickly informs him of the boarding location and the bus route. Meanwhile, on another hospital bed, the scavenger's arm suddenly becomes racked with unbearable pain. Seeing this, the nurse immediately injects him with a vial of sedative before his emotions finally stabilize for the time being. However, it is not over yet. Soon, with everyone working together, the man is lifted onto the ambulance, while all the radiated individuals from the clinic are packed into the back. And in that era of scarce resources, due to the lack of alcohol and medicine, Brazil's economy plummeted, triggering a wave of layoffs. Doctors and nurses actually start protesting for their unpaid wages at the hospital gate, and seeing this, the ambulance drives straight through the crowd. At this moment, none of the hundreds of people present are wearing masks, except for the director who wears a single cloth mask. He personally receives the quarantined personnel. Coincidentally, Evanildo's group is also being transferred from the stadium to the defunct hospital, while that scavenger is left behind in the ambulance. At this time, the staff members are only focused on transferring the quarantined patients, completely ignoring whether the man in the ambulance lives or dies. Subsequently, dozens of radiated patients are locked into isolation rooms. The moment the officer shuts the door, Evanildo immediately senses that something is wrong. Evanildo tries to escape through the restroom, only to find that all the toilets in the quarantine area have been shut down. This sends him into a sudden fit of rage, and he immediately rounds up several other patients, preparing to bash the door open by force. Meanwhile, the outside of the hospital has already been blocked so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. The man inside the ambulance, however, is suffering from severe dehydration, lacking even the strength to cry out for help. Fortunately, the state has dispatched 3 doctors with radiation rescue experience from the capital, and they happen to arrive at the defunct hospital just in time. Just then, the detection equipment lets out an alarm, and after a careful search, Eduardo hurriedly flings open the ambulance door to begin resuscitating the man. Loureiro also urgently calls for backup, yet not a single one of the hundreds of doctors present offers a helping hand, because they have long since tossed their duty to save lives to the back of their minds. In the blink of an eye, Eduardo carries the man to the isolation room, but Evanildo is still making a scene in the quarantine area without pause. At this life or death juncture, the director arrives just in time to defuse the crisis. The man is also carried into the quarantine area, and luckily, after a round of emergency treatment by the doctors, he is pulled back from the brink of death. Meanwhile, Evanildo is left completely dumbstruck by the shock. But things are not that simple at all. Due to the inaction of the relevant authorities, Dr. Orenstein has no choice but to personally inspect the contaminated zone. What's terrifying, however, is that soon enough, the device in Paula's hand sounds the alarm once again. Dr. Orenstein realizes immediately that someone has dumped cesium-137 into the sewers. Paula takes the instrument and starts checking along the sewers immediately, only to discover a small river. But as Paula questions a woman, her words leave them utterly shocked, as all the villagers' drinking water and sewage are mixed together in this very river. Even more horrifyingly, an even more terrifying scene unfolds as Dr. Orenstein and Paula enter this villager's home for an inspection. The woman has actually treated the radioactive elements directly as a religious offering.
Benny!
Ô, gente, que barulho é esse?
This frightens Dr. Orenstein and Paula so much.
Senhores, nós vamos ter que evacuar essas casas todas. A gente tem que bloquear a rua, bloquear o quarteirão.
A gente tem que tirar todo mundo dessas casas agora. Vai!
That they completely lose their composure. On the other side, Marcio quickly tracks down the contaminated bus, but the moment he starts explaining to the crowd, it instantly triggers a riot. Seeing that he cannot suppress the crowd at all, Marcio immediately explains the dangers of nuclear radiation to the bus driver.
Não abre essa porta, não abre. Se você tem fé em Deus, não abre essa porta. Se você abrir, essas pessoas elas vão sumir, elas vão desaparecer, elas não vão ser tratadas, elas vão contaminar mais gente. Então a vida dessas pessoas e das pessoas lá fora estão nas suas mãos.
Fortunately, the driver is a righteous man who does not open the doors without permission, but instead drives the bus straight to the quarantine zone. However, at this time, Governor Roberto is still spreading fake news in front of the media, stating that all contaminated personnel have already been quarantined. As it turns out, before he can even finish his speech, Marcio arrives escorting a whole busload of contaminated passengers. A clever reporter takes advantage of this gap and shoves the microphone right in front of Marcio.
Ônibus radioativo circulando pela cidade de Goiânia.
Senhora, aqui, sim, mas o mais importante é que todo mundo que pegou essa linha 008 rodoviária nas últimas 48 horas venha para o estádio municipal ser medido o mais rápido possível. É isso.
Marcio also leverages the power of the media, hoping that more citizens exposed to cesium-137 radiation will come forward for treatment. Meanwhile, Roberto is still only thinking about his political career. Yet everything is far from over, as the spread of radioactive materials soon alarms the top brass of the military.
Ciência em estado grave que precisam ser transferidos urgentemente.
Nós temos 6 vagas. Olha, faz o seguinte, escolha os mais graves, transfiram para cá com urgência que a nossa equipe vai se encarregar deles.
At this point, even the doctors find themselves at their wits' end. What's worse, however, is that Dr. Orenstein and Paula report an even more severe disaster to Roberto.
Temos que bloquear ruas. Na verdade, bloquear quarteirões inteiros.
O césio contaminou o solo e o esgoto de uma das casas e o pior, com o vento e a chuva ele pode chegar no córrego que passa atrás das casas e piorar muito a situação.
To make matters even more hair-raising, a heavy rain begins to pour from the sky at this exact moment. While driving, Marcio is shocked to find that the radiation detector suddenly emits a burst of alarm sounds. Just as a truck passes by, Marcio instantly senses that something is wrong, and without a word, he pulls a U-turn on the spot, forcibly cutting off the normally driving heavy truck. When Paula checks it with the detection instrument, the meter hits the maximum level once again. Marcio doesn't dare to delay for a second, immediately clarifying the truck's point of origin, and in an instant, he has the driver lead the way to the scrap packaging station. To their even greater surprise, every single waste cardboard box at the packaging station has been severely contaminated by cesium-137.
A gente precisa descartar todo esse papel e isolar o depósito por enquanto.
Nada disso, rapaz. Eu tenho 6 filhos para criar, eu tenho funcionários para pagar aqui.
Amigo, esse papel tá radioativo. Quem encostar nele vai se contaminar, tá bem?
Você não tá entendendo. Tem famílias que dependem desse negócio, rapaz.
Seus filhos estão em risco.
Upon hearing this, the owner is completely dumbfounded. Beyond all expectations, another scrapyard owner named João has actually treated the blue glowing nuclear precision equipment as a treasure. He not only gathers the villagers to admire it, but even pours a large amount of powder onto the table, claiming it came from an alien spacecraft and can cure everything from headaches and fevers to various incurable diseases. Even more psychotically, he actually sells it to the villagers on the spot for an exorbitant price. In a hair-raising move, after João returns home, he pours the radioactive toxins directly in front of his 6-year-old daughter Celeste while she is eating. Little do they know that this family is about to meet a tragic end. What's even more horrifying is that Celeste has just touched the radioactive toxin particles, yet she starts eating the eggs on her plate without even washing her hands. In the blink of an eye, she is rushed to the radioactive quarantine zone. Simultaneously, an anomaly occurs in the laboratory as cesium-130-37 toxins are detected in the bodily fluids of a radiated person, and the detection equipment hits the maximum level once again. The doctor in the lab panics instantly, because if toxins are detected in the samples, it proves that the entire city's drinking water system has also been severely contaminated.
A dose de radiação é tão alta que ele não conseguiu medir de perto.
The doctor doesn't dare to delay for a second and reports the situation to his superiors immediately.
Dr. Eduardo, é Esther do IRD.
Oi, Esther.
Eu tô com o resultado dos exames aqui, eu não tenho boas notícias. Vocês têm que transferir para o Hospital Naval imediatamente Josias, Valêncio, Arthur e Antônia. Eu nunca vi índices de contaminação interna assim. Os órgãos, os tecidos, eles estão sendo irradiados sem parar. Vocês vão ficar aí brigando com infecção, com anemia, nada vai adiantar.
Obrigado, Esther.
Upon hearing this, Eduardo is completely out of options, so he rushes downstairs, finds the stationed news reporters, and makes a decisive, shocking move on the spot.
Os 6 pacientes que foram transferidos para o Rio de Janeiro estão recebendo os melhores cuidados possíveis. Mas temos mais 4 pacientes que precisam ser transferidos para lá urgentemente.
Mas por que eles não foram transferidos ainda, doutor?
O almirante só disponibilizou 6 leitos para esse tipo de acidente. Acontece que o Hospital Naval dispõe de equipamentos mais apropriados e uma equipe preparada para tratar os casos mais graves. É fundamental que eles façam todo o possível para receber esses pacientes o quanto antes.
Immediately after that, he says to his colleagues at the door who are demanding their unpaid wages.
Queria fazer um apelo à equipe médica e de enfermagem aqui do hospital, por favor. Olha, eu sou médico, eu entendo as reivindicações de vocês, mas a emergência não pode parar. Eu tô sozinho, junto com o físico, cuidando de 10 pacientes com síndrome aguda de radiação 24 horas por dia e sem enfermagem. A gente precisa de vocês.
One would think everything would go smoothly, but unexpectedly, a nurse on the scene claims that nuclear radiation is an extremely powerful virus that causes instant infection upon close contact, leading to skin rotting within 3 days. But the doctors at the door don't listen to her nonsense at all, and instead follow Eduardo into the hospital. Even more touchingly, doctors from Brazil's naval hospital soon see the live news, and being deeply moved, they immediately burst into the director's office.
Senhor Almirante, a gente se voluntaria para ajudar o hospital a receber mais pacientes afetados pelo Césio-137.
Meanwhile, the Brazilian Federal Bureau of Investigation also gets involved, immediately questioning the hospital's operators. However, the unscrupulous merchant not only starts making excuses to dodge responsibility, but also uses a very aggressive tone, showing no intention of being held accountable for this radioactive toxin incident. Seeing that Vieira is determined to get to the bottom of it, he immediately shows off the network of connections backing him. Seeing that his background is far from simple, they have no choice but to release him in the end. Beyond all expectations, a mysterious woman finds Vieira the very next day and tries to persuade her to drop the investigation and stop hounding the former hospital operator, or else she will be dismissed and investigated. But the righteous Vieira fires back at her directly. While Roberto holds a press conference to stabilize the city's mood, he directly pushes Dr. Orenstein from the National Nuclear Energy Department to the front stage. At this point, Dr. Orenstein hasn't even received the test report on whether the drinking water is safe.
Césio pode ter chegado na casa das pessoas?
Dr. Orenstein, para a gente deixar bem claro para a população de Goiânia, a água está ou não está contaminada.
A indicação é beber ou não beber água encanada.
Seeing the aggressive reporters below, to prove the water isn't contaminated by cesium-137, he immediately grabs the bottled water on the podium and pours it straight into the trash can. Then, before anyone can react, he fills a bottle directly from the tap, rushes to the reporters, and chugs more than half of it in one go. In reality, Dr. Orenstein is also taking a massive gamble deep down in his heart. Coincidentally, Paula arrives at the scene just then with the lab report.
O meu recado para o povo de Goiânia é que a água dessa cidade está 100% segura. Estão ali nas mãos da doutora Paula Matos para quem quiser comprovar.
But at that very moment, a reporter throws another difficult question at them.
Dr. Orenstein, eu recebi a informação de que caminhão contendo papel contaminado saiu de Goiânia e chegou até uma fábrica de papel reciclado em São Paulo, capital. Aqui nem tinha conhecimento desse fato?
The back-to-back questions leave Dr. Orenstein completely flustered, and the governor is left looking just as bewildered. Little do they know that in the following moments, they will have no idea how to handle the press. While inspecting the neighborhood, Marcio suddenly notices that the wolf dog contaminated by nuclear toxins is also acting strangely. Just as he is about to step forward and seize the wolf dog, right at this critical moment, his companion rushes over and finally scares away the wolf dog. But it is already too late, as a hole has been bitten into Marcio's hazmat suit. Not daring to delay for a single moment, he is admitted to the hospital for isolation in the blink of an eye. By now, Marcio has been working for 3 days straight without closing his eyes, and he is subsequently taken to the gym by doctors to have his physical stamina tested. He uses this method of pedaling a bicycle to flush out the cesium-137 toxins from his skin through sweat. However, Marcio's lab results are far from ideal, as he is suffering from severe anemia and his lymphocyte count has reached an all-time low, requiring him to be treated as a potential radiation patient for the time being. It is only now that Marcio feels a sense of lingering fear, especially since his wife is 4 weeks pregnant. Yet he doesn't dare tell his wife the truth about his isolation. Little does he know that his chances of survival are about to become very slim. Meanwhile, 6 other critical patients are also sent to the Naval Hospital just in time. At this juncture, a doctor experienced in handling nuclear radiation, who was invited from Russia, happens to arrive at the hospital. Evanildo has also fallen into a coma by this time. Antonia arrives at the isolation zone, only able to steal a glance at him from a distance. 3 days later, Antonia's bodily functions begin to fail, as she not only coughs up blood and loses nearly all her hair, but also starts to gradually go blind. Unexpectedly, Evanildo miraculously wakes up and sneaks out of the isolation room, wanting to catch one last glimpse of his wife in the intensive care unit. Fortunately, he is caught red-handed by the duty doctor, who puts a stop to his reckless behavior. But before they can even react, an accident occurs with Celeste, who had accidentally ingested the cesium-137. As the doctors rush in, they find that Celeste has developed a fever of 40 degrees and has begun to have uncontrollable nosebleeds. Seeing the patient's conditions worsening, the medical team from Russia clashes with the local Brazilian team over the treatment protocol. The Russian doctors believe in adopting a conservative treatment method, while the Brazilian doctors want to gamble on the latest techniques. Right at this moment, Dr. Joanna brings a piece of good news.
O tratamento ele ajuda a aumentar a imunidade dos pacientes porque estimula a produção dos glóbulos brancos.
Nunca ouvi falar isso antes. Efeitos colaterais?
Nenhum até agora para leucemia.
E desde quando?
Ano passado, nos Estados Unidos.
E foi aprovado pelo FDA, pelo menos?
Então, eu vou te mandar o fax com o estudo que eu li.
However, the Russian doctors still insist on their conservative approach, claiming they have handled the Chernobyl nuclear disaster before. The two teams reach another deadlock just like that. In order to determine the best treatment plan as quickly as possible, both sides hold one final exchange that afternoon.
With science, and science has its limits, unfortunately. But we are not going to exposure unknown side effects of this drug to our patients. It's irresponsible. It's cruel.
Ultimately, the negotiation results in the adoption of Eduardo's risky treatment method, and he is now betting his entire career on it. The first critical patient to undergo this treatment is that very scavenger. Meanwhile, Roberto begins to dodge his responsibilities once again on the other side, because Dr. Orenstein said the wrong thing at the press conference, causing economic losses to Brazil's agriculture and paper industries. Roberto gives him a harsh lecture on the spot. Immediately following that, the National Minister of Nuclear Energy, Cesar, proposes a plan to handle the cesium-137, only to be rebuffed by Roberto.
Esses tonéis emitem radiação. Não é uma boa ideia ficar carregando esse material pelo país afora.
Quilômetro a mais, quilômetro a menos. Que diferença vai fazer, César?
E se durante o trajeto um dos tonéis se rompe e espalha césio pelos outros estados?
Isso deixa de ser atribuição minha.
On the other hand, Vieira is still conducting a deep investigation into those responsible for the abandonment of the Goiânia Radiotherapy Institute.
O senhor levou as portas, telhas, grades, remadeiramento da clínica dos seus ex-sócios, mas deixou a máquina de césio lá.
Eu não sabia que a máquina ainda estava lá. Os meus ex-sócios queriam se livrar do trambolho. E tenho certeza que eles deixaram para trás de propósito. Para se livrar do problema sem ter que gastar dinheiro.
Seeing that everyone is passing the buck, she interrogates a key figure the very next day.
Tudo foi tirado da clínica, menos a máquina de césio.
A Santa Casa não deixou a gente retirar a máquina. Depois que a gente foi despejado, a gente não pôde mais entrar lá.
Sim, ou não, os senhores notificaram a CNEM?
Claro.
Tem como provar?
The unscrupulous businessman is instantly left speechless by the questioning. At the same time, Dr. Orenstein and the others seek out Roberto once again.
Saem do caminho da doutora Paula e vão direto para a Serra do Cachimbo. Longe da população, como vocês queriam.
Ô, Roberto, isso passou pelo presidente?
Quem você acha que costurou tudo? Irresponsabilidade é acumular lixo na cidade. Você vai ter que acelerar o seu trabalho, doutora. Bom, amanhã chegam mais tonéis.
In the end, Dr. Orenstein leaves the office in total disappointment. The following day, staff members begin the process of disposing of the nuclear contamination sources. In order to find a scapegoat for this nuclear leak incident, the governor actually sets a trap for Dr. Orenstein from the National Nuclear Energy Commission. The next day, he summons Dr. Orenstein to his office and orders them to transport the nuclear waste to the Cachimbo Mountains. Dr. Orenstein and Cesar have no choice but to bite the bullet and accept the mission. However, the next day, several tribal chiefs from the Cachimbo Mountains appear on the streets of the capital to stage a protest. Immediately, Roberto devises a second contingency plan.
O Congresso Nacional aprovou e o presidente da República sancionou há pouco uma lei que estabelece que cada estado brasileiro é responsável por acomodar seus próprios rejeitos radioativos.
Soon, construction sites are selected and projects are rushed in various locations. Immediately after being discharged from the hospital, Marcio takes on the responsibility of leading the nuclear waste transportation. Under his supervision, concrete blocks weighing tens of thousands of tons are quickly hoisted onto trucks. Just as they think everything is going to proceed smoothly, the transport truck hasn't driven very far before it is intercepted by tens of thousands of villagers. Seeing the crowd growing larger, Dr. Orenstein has no choice but to go down and communicate with the village chief personally.
Esse caminhão, ele precisa passar.
Não é só o caminhão radioativo, Bruno. Ninguém vai passar aqui.
Não, mas esse caminhão não é radioativo.
Tanto faz. A gente não vai deixar vocês virem aqui e jogar essa bomba aqui e sumir, não.
Mas acontece que é perfeitamente seguro.
Ah, é? Então leva pra sua casa, jovem.
Realizing that communication is futile, the group can only turn around and head back. Even more unexpectedly, Roberto actually shows up at the scene to conduct another round of negotiations with the village chief.
Eu já entendi como é que eu te ajudo. Agora como é que você vai me ajudar?
Se vocês liberarem a estrada, eu prometo começar a procurar imediatamente outro lugar para o depósito. Uma semana?
2 dias.
But things are not that simple, and in the blink of an eye, he organizes people from all departments together. Roberto tells them to transport the concrete blocks into the village overnight, but warns that if the plan fails, someone must take the blame. Dr. Orenstein quickly picks up on Roberto's underlying meaning and immediately stands up to speak.
Coloca a culpa na CNEM. Diz que foi a gente que decidiu e que o senhor não teve alternativa.
In the blink of an eye, midnight arrives, and the transport trucks secretly hit the road. They think the nuclear waste has finally found a place to rest, but they are shocked to find that the villagers are on guard 24 hours a day, blocking Marcio's path once again. To make matters worse, a situation arises on Dr. Orenstein's end as well.
O Ministério Público te indiciou por homicídio culposo.
O que é bom e raro, porque você vai poder se defender.
Coincidentally, Marcio arrives at the office at that moment, and Dr. Orenstein assigns him the follow-up disposal work. That very afternoon, Dr. Orenstein is hauled off to court.
Como diretor da CNEM, eu cumpri todos os protocolos. Eu fiz o meu trabalho com muito cuidado. Mas cuidado não foi suficiente. Se eu tivesse evitado que aquela máquina de Césio ficasse abandonada e exposta, 4 pessoas não teriam morrido. Eu fui ao enterro de 2 delas.
As it turns out, before Dr. Orenstein even arrived at the court, an accident occurred at the hospital. Celeste and 3 other critical patients have unfortunately passed away from emphysema caused by the cesium-137 radiation. However, a conflict breaks out just as they are preparing for the burial. Fortunately, they are eventually buried successfully in the public cemetery. At the same time, Ivanildo has recovered his health at the hospital. However, at this very moment, his heart is filled with immense regret. Afterward, he finds João, but at this point, João doesn't even want to lay eyes on Ivanildo, because it was precisely because of Ivanildo that his daughter tragically passed away. Immediately after, Ivanildo actually starts shifting the blame onto that canister. At this point,
se não tivesse comprado aquela maldita marmita, amaldiçoada, nada disso tinha acontecido, né?
João doesn't know how to handle the situation either, because he simply cannot accept the news of his daughter's passing. However, the story does not end there. In the end, Dr. Orenstein does not take the fall for the governor, and the nuclear waste is properly disposed of. Ivanildo and João are also discharged from the hospital after recovering shortly thereafter.
Juízo, viu, rapazes?
Com todo respeito, doutor. Juízo a gente sempre teve. Quem não tem são os mandantes aí, os manda-chuva.
That is the full story of Radioactive Emergency, and I will see you in the next episode.